Good morning, gardening friends. Today is Sunday, July 9th, at about 6:30 in the morning. And it's pleasant out here right now. The mosquitoes haven't come out yet, although I'm sure they will. And I'm just sitting out back here enjoying the coolness for a while. We've had a stretch of extremely hot weather, and now we're back to just the normal hot weather. So we'll be in the mid-90s as opposed to the high 90s. I didn't do a lot of gardening this week because of the heat. I did do a lot of watering to keep things growing. Here you can see the angel's trumpet has risen above the aspidistra. I'm standing on the deck, and this is eye level to me, and the deck is a couple of feet off the ground. So that's about an 8-foot tall angel's trumpet, and it's loaded with buds. This is the peach one, so they should be starting to bloom pretty soon. The little archway of the potato vines is looking nice and full. The plumerias are still in bloom. Some of the spent flowers I just picked off this morning as they kind of litter the deck, as do, although it's not happening too much yet, the crepe myrtle. My white crepe myrtle is in bloom. Crepe myrtles are a beautiful tree, but they are messy. Especially the white ones, because everything shows up. You can see the spent flowers fall, and when you get enough of them in bloom, it looks like snow over here. I did repot the oh, it's not cypress. I can't think of the name of it right now. It's so early in the morning. Papyrus. And put a lot of fertilizer in the pot. And it's looking pretty good. Got my fountain going today. I'm getting a new flush of growth on my roses. These are Oklahoma. They're just hybrid teas. You can see the anthocyanins are present. I was a chemist before I retired, and that's that red pigment or red coloration in the leaves. It's kind of in reverse. What it is doing here for the roses is it's acting like a sunscreen, protecting the young leaves from the sun. And what'll happen is it stays present in the leaf, but as the chlorophyll takes over, it overwhelms the red pigment, and the green pigment survives, or becomes the most dominant. It's kind of like the fall in reverse for maple trees. The colors you see in the fall and tree leaves are present in those leaves all year round. It's just you don't see them until the chlorophyll breaks down. Science lesson for the day is now over. Banana trees are huge. And I finally planted the lantana in the front yard. I'll show it to you a little later. This little topiary has done well, the rosemary. It did not grow at all last year until I repotted it this year. The colocasia is sending out its feelers all over the deck, but I'm letting them grow. I just want to see how long they'll get. I repotted this. This is a seedling clivia or clivia that I got last year, or maybe the year before, I forgot. But the small pot that it was in was absolutely full of roots. They do like to be root bound, So I went ahead and put it in a slightly bigger pot. These pitcher plants are just doing fabulously well here. The nepenthes, and they are absolutely full of bugs. I don't know if you can see inside of them, but the lower ones really trap a lot of bugs. This angel's trumpet is just full of flower after I fertilized it. You do need to keep the fertilizing up, and if you're growing an angel's trumpet in a pot, because they're very, very heavy feeders. Not much new is happening over here. This saw palmetto looks really good. I've limbed it up, and I have a solar light. I've never shown you the garden at night, but I have solar lights scattered around in my backyard, and I highlight this particular palm at night. The one thing that I did notice is my butterfly gingers are starting to bloom. And talk about fragrance, these are really, really, really sweet. The flowers only last for a day, but there's usually a bunch in the stalk. Well, I take that back. They might last for a couple of days, I forget. But they're very sweet scenting. You can smell them sweet scented. You can smell them from probably about 10-15 feet away. They're most fragrant at night when they first open. Haven't really done too much new over here. Really, I didn't do a lot of gardening this week. This week was an odd week. Had a couple of friends' birthdays. Poor Miss Mimi had to go to the vet. She had an eye infection, which she is getting over. And she hadn't been to the vet for a while. And actually her birthday is this month as well. She's turning 18. And in any event, while she was at the vet, I had her inoculations brought up to date. So she was a sore pussycat when she came home. But I've got an ointment for her eye, and it's doing much better. She's almost back to normal, knock on wood. Here you can see my ponytail palm is doing well. Oh, I see I need to water my fincas because that one is starting to wilt. Look how tall this has gotten. This is a seedling that came up of a pecan, and it's about 4 feet tall. I went ahead and put a stake on it, although it really didn't need it. I do things like that because if I want to save something, when people come and visit, they know I'm a meticulous gardener. So if they see something that might look like a weed, sometimes they're tempted to pull it out. So I figure this way, with the stake next to it, no one will be tempted to pull that out for me. I did clean up my blueberries this week. Now that they're being exposed to full sun, they are just spreading and growing nicely, thickening out. You can see I cut these back and they've already got fresh buds on them. This angel's trumpet hasn't grown yet. I just planted it about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Back in here, all is well. I wound up taking one of the ferns that was hanging on the wall. There was a gap over there that I had planted the ladyfinger palm in, but the ladyfinger palm is still growing. You can kind of see it just barely at the back side of the fern. But to fill the gap in the meantime, I figured let me leave the fern there. It's still in its pot. I didn't plant it in the ground. And actually, that's what I did in the front yard. And what's going to happen is, I guess spores or whatever are going to shake out of the fern leaves, and they will take root in the ground, and I'll have a pile of ferns there. This angel's trumpet looks like it's got some kind of problem at the top. Something must have eaten it, or tried to eat it. This pretty much stays unchanged here, other than the size of the fatsias. A little fountain is going. Big flush of growth on the male cycad. And I noticed I'm getting a second batch of flowers on my daylilies. These daylilies have really spread this year, and I don't know why this year is different than any other year. But they are really taking over this bed, which is fine. That's what I anticipate them doing, as I'd like to fill this bed full of daylilies. And at least when they're not in bloom, you'll have lush green leaves there. Crocosmias are still blooming. They bloom from the bottom of the stems to the top. And then, of course, the old flowers fall off. And I still have my hydrangeas. Here's some more of the gingers, butterfly ginger. These are very fragrant and beautiful plants. However, well, it's not a however, you just have to know how to grow them. They grow linearly. So if you plant a ginger in a spot, one of these butterfly gingers, next year it'll come up maybe 3 or 4 inches in one direction, and the year after that it'll be 3 or 4 inches farther in that direction. So after 4 or 5 years, you wind up being about 2 feet away from where you originally planted the plant. And the root will still be there, it just won't send up any more green. This is all looking good. It looks like something got into the middle of this, but it'll survive. I did plant my lantana. This is where I put some of the 2 lantanas here, and then I have 2 in the front yard. You can see here all of the sedum that I planted is really growing, spreading, getting bigger. It's kind of a nice look with the coxcombs there, the celosia. I wouldn't necessarily have put the yellow and the red together, but it actually looks okay. I'd like to have a ring of that sedum around that bed at some point. We'll see. It'll be a fight to the finish between the daylilies and the sedum. I'm sure the daylilies will win, because the sedum, although it spreads quickly, it is very delicate, easily broken apart and broken up. Here you can see the spiderwort is still in bloom, as are the Lenten roses. This is looking better. Excuse me. The sweet potato vines I lowered in this trough. I had them raised so they were at the top of the trough. I lowered them down and they look better now. Mandevilla still doing well. I had to shape it up a little bit because it's starting to get a little wispy. I think, well, it is a vine, so it's starting to spread like a vine. Let's go around quickly to the front. I always like looking through here. I've got to trim back this ivy. I keep ivy just on the fence. I don't let it grow up the house. It wants to. But what I do is I go around with clippers and clip all that ivy off the house. This is still doing well. And the cuttings that I took of that coleus have rooted, and I actually potted them up this week, a couple days ago. What you do when you start rootings in water, or cuttings in water, water roots are not the same as ground roots. So you really want to leave them in water just until the roots start coming out, and then stick them in the ground in a pot. And then what I do is, for the first week at least, I always keep the pot in a what would you say, a dish or a bowl or something, and keep the pot continuously moist. And then over the next few weeks, I gradually let the pot dry out a little bit. But so far they've been rooted, they've been planted for about 3 or 4 days, and they have not wilted. They're in my front porch. Road construction hasn't improved or changed all that much, although the deep pit was filled by my house. And here you see probably a 1 or 2 ton paperweight. That was the other exciting news of the week. I barely made it home and my car died right there. And I've decided I'm going to be replacing it, so I will be donating it this week. But that's the second car that I've had that has had key problems. I was unable to turn the key to turn the car on, and I had called a couple of weeks ago a locksmith, and they did what they could do, and they showed me how to use a pair of vice grips. And I got stuck at a friend's house and used the vice grips and wound up bending the key. And I wound up getting it home, but along the way all the power to the dash was lost. And I've been on YouTube. It is just the key cylinder or ignition key that needs to be replaced, but there's not a place in town that will work on a Kia. So the next car I buy will not be a Kia. I called the dealership, and what they told me, or I called one of the dealerships and said exactly what I need to be done. And they said, well, the soonest we can get at it is January. Now I'm calling in July. So it's like, oh, no thank you. My fig tree is still doing well. I did have to get rid of the, what did I have here? The squash that was here, zucchini. It turns out from the animals eating it, they kind of bent it down, and apparently some kind of bug got in the stem, a borer, and it hollowed out the stem, and eventually the whole plant died. So this is where I put the geraniums that used to be on my front porch. Cucumber, however, is doing fabulously well. And I've been eating it makes just little cucumbers like for pickling, but they taste absolutely delicious. Ooh, I need to fill the bird bath up. We've been getting some rain the last few days. Yesterday we did not get any, so I haven't needed to water, but apparently I should have yesterday. Here you can see one of the flaws. This is, I don't remember the name of this Rose of Sharon. I bought it about 3 or 4 years ago, and it grows in a column. The problem is, as you can see, the stems get very weak. It gets very tall very quickly, and when it blooms, the blooms apparently weigh down the branches and bend them, so you kind of have to tie it up to keep it in a shape of a column. But it's white flowers and it's pretty, so eventually the stems will get strong enough to stand up straight. But it is kind of a pain to have to tie that in to keep it upright. And that's about all the news that's fit to print. today. My limelight hydrangea is living up to its namesake. It's a beautiful lime-colored flower. That will get tall. I had one in a garden I used to have in upstate New York, and it got to be about 15 feet tall. And that's why I planted it there. I want it to just grow wild and be a big hemispherical plant at the end of this hedge that I've got. So it will eventually fill in this gap that's there. We'll give you a last look at the potager. I've been giving tomatoes away because I'm sick of eating these tomatoes. Been having a lot of the basil and okra. I've eaten more okra than I usually eat. But yeah, everything is doing well. So I hope you all had a good 4th of July weekend. And I hope you all stay cool. And I'll see you next week.